Our next speaker is Professor L. Jean Camp. She's a professor at the School of Informatics and Computing at Indiana University. She joined Indiana after 8 years at Harvard's Kennedy School and the Engineering Systems Division at MIT. She spent the year after earning her doctorate from Carnegie Mellon as a senior member of the technical staff at Sandia. And she began her career as an engineer at Catawba Nuclear Station with an MSCE at UNC in Charlotte. Professor Camp has done foundational work of the interdiscipline of economics of security and risk communication. Her publications have also addressed designing for trust, including privacy-enhancing technology, secure transactions, and the usability need to make these acceptable. She's author of more than 200 publications. So, Jean.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to get this mic right. You know, one thing they definitely do to women is they give us fake pockets. That is absolutely something that we can end immediately, but not in security. Nope. Okay, so I am going to talk to you about a different kind of diversity, and that is the diversity of the people who are on the network with us. Most testing and analysis of risk and behaviors in computer security in the academic realm is done with students because they're where we are. They're easy to find, they're easy to locate. But it turns out that information, CS and information students are quite different than everybody else on the internet. And as you pointed out, they're mostly male. The people who, the gender bias changes as you age. So if you look at aging in America, there's going to be a massive demographic shift as the boomers become older. So the boomers are going to be older, more female, less computer aware, and in addition, older people have systematic kind of risk biases. And what else do they have that's very new? They have all their retirement assets and no ability to go back in the workforce and regain those assets. And one thing that's definitely true offline is that older people are targeted for fraud. So how do we deal with this? How do we make this work? Well, I want to talk to you about thinking about risk communication. A lot of people say security education, we need to educate the users need to know, but what we really need to do is change user behavior. And then I'm going to give you 2 examples of how that works. So if you think about security as risk, what do we know about risk communication? We should get the numbers right. We should tell them the numbers. We have to explain what the numbers mean. We have to show them it's a good deal. A lot of communication is about educating. What is phishing? This product is a good deal for you. You should use this security product. And then all we have to do is treat them nice. But what we really have to do is make them partners because they are on the internet with us. And if we don't provide them the help that they need, their bots are going to harm our experiences. So that was from 1995. So I would say in computer security, we're actually still on step 3. And it's okay not to get the numbers perfectly right if you understand that the goal of risk communication is to change behavior. It is not to provide completely statistically accurate risk estimates. The goal of, because if you can't do anything about the risk, why tell anybody about it anyway, right? I mean, there's probably some small sub-level of, carpet off-gassing at every conference you've ever been to. Would you want to be communicated about that? No, there's nothing you can do. What are you going to stop going to conferences? So think about it as behavior and think about them as partners. And the way you do this is you learn from other domains. So seatbelt alarms do not come on when you're going 60 miles an hour. You don't really need a seatbelt when you're sitting in your car and you're parked. You don't really need a seatbelt when you're going 10 miles an hour, you'll be fine. We don't wait until you're going 65 miles an hour on the freeway, and then I'm like, oh, stop, whoop, seatbelt. We do that in security. We wait until people are deeply engaged in a task, and then we interrupt them. So they need to be available. If what we tell a user is, well, what you need is some antivirus protection. We recommend this, right? Well, maybe they'll go and get fake AV. I think fake antivirus is, the fact that it works is just embarrassing for our industry. It means that people are reaching out and paying criminals to take their money because we're so bad at communicating to them what they ought to do, right? I mean, banks don't have that. You also need to expect people to have different ambient levels of risk, right? Some people are very risk-seeking. You can't use the same kind of risk communication for a teenager as you use for an older person. So one of the reasons I got into risk communication from older people was because I was doing these risk communications and these warnings, and so I went with a friend to an event for retirees, and these things had tested really well in the lab. My students loved it. Oh, the older people hated it. They found them hugely inactionable. They didn't know what to do, and they felt like I was just not respecting them. So I had to learn about how do you communicate and how do you respect the risk thermostats and risk budgets of older users who are going to be targeted because they have the money, right? Now here's a nice model. Here's one of the kind of things that we do to help people. The scam part is known as phishing attack. Phishing is the stupidest name in the world. It's a joke about phone phreaking. It gives you no information. If you're not familiar with computer security, the word phishing doesn't give you any help at all. I mean, we're not at risk of spontaneous combustion, but at least we know what spontaneous combustion is. And one of my favorite warnings actually just puts it in quotes, because if you put it in quotes, then everybody understands what the word means. Heteroscedasticity, that's your statistical education for today. Ooh, there's not a timer on this. Here we go. So here's an example of effective cross-generational risk communication. People might not stop smoking, although people have stopped smoking, but everybody understands that risk. So this is the computer science version of that risk communication. So that's kind of what we do. Tell me that's not true. So how do we do this in a way that makes it actionable? So one of the things we do is we look at, for specific users, we try to come up with the appropriate mental models instead of educating people. Because we should also all be educated about our health and our eyes and everything else, but we're not going to. And my users, my point of this slide is there's tools to do this. They're 78 years old. They're counting the time they have left. They're like, I have 4 or 14 years left. I don't want to spend it learning computer security. I absolutely, they do not want to know what BGP hijacking is, right? So we asked this group about phishing. They said, I don't know. The second was spam related. The fourth was behavioral advertising, right? That's what they thought phishing is. And I mean, you got to give them, behavioral advertising is irritating. And then we ask them, what's a public key certificate? What does that little lock indicates a public key certificate? What's a public key certificate? Most of them thought it meant, what we wish it would mean in our wildest dreams, that there's actionable legal redress, that there's a good privacy policy, safe from hackers. That's what a popular phrase was. So a lot of people say, well, we got to educate them, we got to have better people. I'm saying full stop on that. What we need is a better understanding of their mental models. So here's a card sorting experiment we did. We came up with images of war and health and vandalism and physical safety with the monster and the pig, and then financial risk with the poor, frightened, safe. And we asked people, And then we gave them some words that we thought were obvious, like, battlefield. We felt like battlefield goes pretty well with tank, and infections go pretty well with the medical model. And you can see that we do use these models for ourselves in computer security. We talk about demilitarized zones. We do talk about computer infections and worms and viruses and hygiene. So how do people understand these models? People did understand the models. And then we have a low risk, a medium risk, and a high risk version for each of the models. And these have different we use this visual risk communication in a toolbar and allow people to select whatever risk they want. I mean, at the level of safe, you disable unknown scripts, there's ad blocking, there's no tracking. We call the trusted routes. We don't have the whole trusted route base. I don't know how many how many trusted routes is in any of the popular browsers is a moving target. And so what we do is we narrow those, because when you download a new version of your browser, I don't think you just spontaneously made an informed risk decision to change your core trust. And we do a lot of cookie deleting, but that, that can be irritating. And, oh, sorry, this is at the, and then what you get is, why is my widget not working? Why is this not working? If you want it to work, you just click the other buttons and become more or less safe. So the thing about these warnings is they provide you with different things of what to do. So security is spatial boundaries. We talk about exfiltration, locks and keys, and addresses. Like, I have a home page. Think about that you have a home page. And what we want to communicate there is, don't let anybody into your house. Don't let strangers into your house, right? Don't download stuff. This is like a fake AV model. There are 9 dimensions of risk, and these dimensions determine how a risk is perceived. And these include if you can control your exposure, if you control the mitigation. And I am not going to go over all of these. But the point here is that different risk communications suggest different kinds of behavior, right? So personal safety, what do you do in the zombie apocalypse, right? What if you're not in Costco when it starts? So what do you do in the zombie apocalypse? You avoid you avoid bad websites. You avoid unsafe places. You're about to go into an unsafe place. Let's not go there, right? This is a better let's not go there, I would argue, than the certificate warnings. So here we have health and security. This is what we want to communicate for things like patching, because patching is computer hygiene, right? That's the keeping your machine updated is the, if we say it's the practical equivalent of washing your hands, right? But that doesn't make any sense if we try to say that about not going to a blocked site, because you want the behavior and the metaphor to work together to provide adequate guidance. So this is kind of annoyance that you can clean up when something happens. So that web certificate warning didn't give you any information about this. It didn't say this is severe or not severe, or you really do have to go to this website. I mean, you may have to go to the IRS website regardless of the quality of the IRS website, and you definitely have to go to your employer's website no matter how silly their policies may be, right? So this is this is kind of low risk. If you go there, they're going to dump a bunch of cookies on your site, and they're going to start trying to track you. So, it's not severe. We can mitigate it. We can clean it up. So how do you instrument this? This is not a picture that you show as risk communication. This is just a high-level architecture view of what we did. We have developed network context and web context in a user personalization model, and this is open source. And if you wanted to look at it, I'd be thrilled. And then we did the safety reconfiguration. We generated warnings, but we also generated the right metaphors, the right mental models for the risk. And here's an example of it in use. You can see this is the same web page on low risk and high risk with the, don't download things. And as the user, all you see is that I have this one button. And this button controls what I see. This is not an antivirus control. It's not a phishing control. But it is, but they're all integrated together. Like when you go to the doctor, you want your cough to get better. You don't want to know, and learn about, more about, mitochondria, right? You just want your cough to get better. And that's our model, easy to understand, confidence building, and control is in their hands. And you can see people change their behavior. So the little green bar is at how you would normally browse. And that is to say full risk. And the yellow is medium risk and the red is high risk. And people chose to change their browsing behaviors. Now and they also understood that it was about risk. So we just installed it and we said, you can install this and we want you to use it a number of hours a week. We want you to use it 20 hours a week. And the first week, it was for our participants, they were more like 17 than 20, although we weren't paying them, right? It wasn't an experiment. But by the last week, they were using it more than the mandatory time. And they mostly understood that it had something to do with security, and they liked having the ads blocked. But they liked being able to turn them on when something didn't work also. So very simple metaphor. So that's an example of ambient risk communication. So I want to talk to you about, give you another example about action-based risk communication. So when you're browsing the web, you cannot make people do a decision at every single site. So it just remembers the domain name, so it is sensitive to any kind of farming, another stupid word in security that communicates nothing. And it kind of requires DNS reliability. So think about picking an app. Everybody in here has apps on their phone. I teach a graduate computer science class. In the class, when I talk about app security, I have them compare the privacy preferences of any two apps. And some of the Apple users, and these are, they end up having to go to the web page of the app and read the background information, right? It is not easy to compare these things based on security and privacy. So what do you want? You want people to be able to compare them. You want them to understand that security is a thing. It's a good thing. They can get more security, right? You could get a better app. But right now, it's very hard to figure that out. You guys know what a lemons market is? This picture is a joke about security being a lemons market. A lemons market is like when you buy a used car, you don't have information about the car, but the seller does. So as a result, people with really good cars tend to keep them because they're only going to get the price for a crappy car. So what we did was we said, well, how about if we just make it easy? So it turns out being happy is good, at all ages. Everybody wants to be happy. Throwing up is bad at all ages, right? It's not a gender thing. You don't have to worry about, maybe people will misinterpret that. So this was the platform we used. This was Android 5, and we just added additional information based on the security and privacy of the app. That's all we did. We added a little string of information, and it summarized the permissions based on the category of the app, right? So for example, flashlights do not need that many permissions, but dating apps need a lot of permissions to function. And we otherwise made it exactly the same. So this one was actually an Amazon Turk experiment. This wasn't an in-person experiment. So we did this first version of the experiment, and we used locks, and we used smiley faces, and which we have frowns here, and then we use kind of googly eyeballs, and that is because there's a social theory about looking at eyes. The first thing babies see are eyes. And you can see, if you don't have the information, if you're just in the control group, you can't make a decision based on privacy. Because how can you compare these? I mean, I ask my students to do it. They know how to find information. It takes them 5 minutes to compare 2 apps. And they have to document it. And if you're just want, a game to play while you're, waiting at the dentist office, and concurrently, the privacy of the apps that were chosen went up. So we tested that with mTurk with 500 users, and we found the lock had the strongest signal. So we made a fake Play Store, and we ran all the apps through privacy grade, and then we used the locks. And in that case, there was familiarity, and it really did change people's behavior. In that case, we used a Bayesian analysis, and we showed that it was not equivalent to a sample. I guess I'll just maybe skip through that slide. So here's the comparison. Here's how secure are these apps versus how secure is this flashlight. Which one of those can you use? Which one of those is really actionable? People don't check permissions, and they don't understand permissions. You need a multi-layered thing so that you can just look at the lock, you could choose to read the permissions, or you can go to the manufacturer's website. So the point of the slide is that it totally changed people's behavior. All right? It's good to have the results. It shows that the distribution of apps selected in our group, when there was the option, when they weren't all identical under flashlights, they were all identical, that was indistinguishable from a random selection from the market. And then we had other categories where people could make trade-offs, and the existence of trade-offs, positive trade-offs were made. So I want to argue for appropriate mental models, help people decide what to do. Communicate to them based on the threat that you have, and use risk communication to change behavior, not to change the educational or knowledge state of the user, because your skull is not thick enough to get through that brick wall. It's not going to happen. All users aren't going to change, but we can change for the information that we provide to users. So that's it.
Lawyers often determine how we communicate, right, in terms of legal agreements, that type of thing, where usability is not even a concern. If we started communicating in the way that you propose, what liabilities will we face?
So one of the arguments against privacy policies is that they are really just mechanisms to shift risk from the producer or information product generator onto the end user. So the larger domain of liability is kind of all we have now, and I don't think it's working very well. I don't think our current liability structure is functioning adequately in the market. And the other thing that determines how we speak beyond bankers are, beyond lawyers, are bankers, right? So if we had a situation in which people were able to search and pick products that had better privacy, maybe we can make a difference in the market, and then people would be willing to accept, would be willing to address issues of liability in risk communication.
So in this particular scenario, no one has fiduciary responsibility to tell the user anything that is in their best interest. How do you see us overcoming that?
I think that the marketplaces would have that interest. I think that this is a situation where somebody like, I've talked to the people at Consumer Reports, would like to see this. They have an interest, and they have a lot of experience with litigious producers, and I have faith in their lawyers. Another group that I think would work well that I've been seeking to connect with and is the AARP, because they have members. They're a member-generated organization. I don't know if they certainly don't have fiduciary requirements to come up with a new app store, but if would serve their members.
Since we're running a little behind on time, we'll thank Jean for her talk. Thank you.